I'd like to welcome you to this candidate forum for the Ames City Council, which is brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Ames and Story County. The League is a nonpartisan political organization dedicated to encouraging citizens to be informed participants in their government on the local, state, and national levels. Tonight, we are meeting the candidates running in the November 5th City Council election. This forum is broadcast live on Government Access Channel 12, live streamed on the City of Ames Facebook page, and will be archived for later viewing. I want to thank the City of Ames for use of the council chambers and for televising and streaming this event. Also, a thank you to all the media here helping us communicate with our community. I am Linda Sarah Hagedorn. I'm the president and member of the Ames League, and I have the honor of moderating this forum. We're going to begin the 2019 Ames City Council forum. Our candidates are Joe Van Erdewyk from Ward 4, Rachel Junk, Ward 4, Chris Nelson, also from Ward 4, Brownwyn Beatty Hanson at large, and Timothy Garton from Ward 2. We're going to begin giving each of our candidates a 3-minute introduction. After the candidate introductions, we're going to open the forum to questions and comments from you, the audience, and not only those that are watching at home. At this time, we have a timer. The timer didn't make it. Okay, we're going to have to get a timer because we want to make sure that our candidates and the questions adhere to the time. All right, so let's start with Mr. Joe Van Erdewyk. You want to have your 3-minute introduction.
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for making it out on this, less than pleasant evening. I really do appreciate it. I'm a graduate of Iowa State. I'm an Iowa native. I grew up in Carroll County and moved to Cedar Rapids before coming to Ames to attend Iowa State. I graduated with a degree in history and a minor in political science, and I've lived here for 8 years. I've been a working person and a resident for 6 years, year-round, and I think that I bring to the table something that other people don't, which is I understand what it's like to being a working person in our community. I understand what it's like to deal with the financial strains that come with the high cost of living in our community and the expensive housing that we have to offer. I think that we need to work to address those things. The reason why I think that I'm the best fit is because I personally experienced those financial strains. I understand what it's like to go 10 days before my next paycheck, struggling to make ends meet. And I also understand that we need to bring smart, thoughtful ideas to address the issues we're facing, and that includes the housing issues that we're facing. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Rachel Junk.
Hi, my name is Rachel Junk, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a 20-year-old lifelong resident of Ames, Iowa, also a junior at Iowa State studying chemical engineering. The reason that I'm running for city council is to represent both the lifelong residents of the Ames community as well as students like me. I feel that I can especially connect with students that might not know how much city council affects their everyday lives. Some of my main issues that I'd like to address while on council, I'd like to have a high quality of life for everyone that lives in Ames, and I think that this is one way that we can have more students at Iowa State want to stay in Ames and continue their futures after they graduate. I'd also like to address affordable housing issues in our community and making Ames more welcoming and inclusive to all. Part of that inclusivity is making sure that people who want to live in Ames can afford it. And then lastly, I'd like to address the issue of climate change. It's not just an issue at the global level, it's also an issue here locally. And there are a lot of solutions that we can put into action to make our city carbon neutral and more green for the future. So thank you for coming tonight and being active in civic engagement.
Thank you. Okay, Chris Nelson.
All right. Good evening. First of all, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting and congratulating you on your upcoming 100th anniversary, yes. Even though this chapter was, I think, 1925. So I appreciate the work you do to engage people in the political process. I'm Chris Nelson, current Ward 4 council person, and this year I'm running for a third term. I'm a sixth-generation Ames resident. I graduated from Ames High School and Iowa State University with a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering and a master's degree in civil engineering. and an MBA from the University of Iowa. And I'm married to an Ames native. I have 3 children in the Ames schools. I work for my family's 111-year-old electrical business where I'm an Iowa licensed master electrician. So why am I running again? Well, the detailed answer is lengthy and should be clear by the end of the forum. But the broad answers is to quote from my brochure. Ames is in a great place right now, and it's positioned well to capitalize on new opportunities to grow our community, create opportunity, and continue to enhance and improve our quality of life. I'd also like to highlight as part of that, it's across the board that we get accolades for this. We've won 3 awards recently across the age spectrum. 2 years in a row as the best college town in America from 24/7 Wall Street, best cities for working parents from Smart Asset, and top 5 small metro areas for retirees to age successfully. So we like to take care of the entire community. So what else do I mean by that? Well, it's continued commitment to these city council goals. There's 7 of them there. Strengthening downtown and campus town, promoting economic development, sustainability efforts, expanding sustainability efforts, addressing housing needs, promoting a sense of one community, strengthening our human services, and encouraging healthy lifestyles. It's something I've been committed to for 6 years, will continue to be committed to if I'm elected to another term. Lastly, I do want to play a role in completing the 2040 comprehensive plan. It, along with the other incorporated plans, will be the guiding document for the community for the next 20 years. It's one of the reasons I ran 6 years ago, and I do want to see it through to its completion next year. That all being said, I don't consider my work on council complete. I hope to talk in more detail about other accomplishments and priorities this evening, and well, that's why I'm running for a 3rd term. I look forward to answering your questions tonight.
Thank you, Chris. Bronwyn Beatty Hanson.
Yes, hi. Again, my name is Bronwyn Beatty Hanson, and I want to continue to serve because I still love Ames 4 years into the job, and I want to continue our trajectory as a progressive and cool city with a high quality of life. I think Ames is like the perfect confluence of community and culture, and we need to maintain both of those as we grow into the future. So I've been serving on council for 4 years, and I'm proud of a lot we've accomplished. I think we have gotten a lot done in that time, but I do see more opportunities for positive change. And for me, climate change, carbon reduction, those are the main issues I see. Really, everything else to me is a moot point if we can't get our climate under control. And so in the next 4 years, I'm really looking forward to working with ideas for how to affect that as a city and how to encourage citizens to do it, privately too, how the city can educate or motivate citizens to take a stronger role in climate change. So for me, that my passion for Ames and interest in seeing it continue to life, progressive city. Those are my main goals. Thoughtful and a deliberate decision maker, a good listener, and a quality leader for Ames. So thank you again for coming out tonight, taking a role in civic engagement, supporting the league, and thank you to the league for hosting.
Okay. Thank you, Bronwyn. Timothy Garton.
Thank you. Thank you to the league for putting this on. You folks came out on a very dismal night, and so appreciate you doing that. And thank you to the candidates for preparing and coming tonight. I look forward to tonight's conversation. Unlike many of the forums that we will participate in, this one probably offers the most opportunities for people in the audience to ask questions. And so I have some suggestions for questions to ask us, that I'll cover in a second. But a little bit about my background. My wife and I came here for school in the mid-1980s. We returned in 1996, and I've been practicing law here in Ames since 1996. We have 4 children. Our second child graduated from Iowa State not that long ago, is in a graduate program in physics in Virginia Tech, and I have 2 students at Iowa State now. My wife is a graphic designer, and I also teach a class at Iowa State now in business law. So I ran 6 years ago, really sort of 2 drivers. One was out of concern for economic development. We went through a sustained period where there was very little in the way of economic growth in Ames that reflected And it's important we diversify the jobs in the community. But I was also very concerned about a lot of human service issues. I've been the chair of the Asset Commission, involved in a number of different organizations that deal with human services. And I think it was important to have someone at the dais that had a strong background in human services. So when I meet with people who are potential candidates for office, there are four general buckets I look at as I think about that person. And maybe this will be helpful for you as you think about the kinds of questions that you might ask tonight. So the first is the background and experience of the person. I think it matters. The city of Ames has a budget of $250 million. That's a lot of money. And so this issue of what kind of background the person has, what do they bring to the table for taking on that kind of responsibility. Secondly, having a broad view of city government. You can't really sit at this council and only focus on one thing. You can be focused on the environment, and that's great, but you don't have the luxury of focusing only on that. There are a number of other issues, whether economic development, quality of life, that are important. The third is community service. I think it's important that a person has a track record of community service, not just for the community to get to know the candidate, but for the candidate to get to know the community and to understand the needs of the community. And finally, someone who plays well in the sandbox. We have to make decisions together. And so I think that's an important criteria. But I'm also very concerned, I appreciate this about the league, is that we do our work in a nonpartisan basis. Look forward to the questions tonight. Thank you.
Okay. All right, audience, now it's your turn. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions of all of the candidates. If you'd like, you can sit at the front row if you have a question to ask, and each person will have an opportunity to ask that question up at the mic over there in the corner. It's really important, because we are on television, that you state your name and speak right into the microphone. And I'm going to ask us not to make any other comments from where you sit, only at the mic. You can write a question or comment on a card if you'd rather not personally go up and ask the question, and then those cards are available out in the foyer. Those watching Channel 12 can also call in questions. The number to call is 515-239-5214. I believe it's on the screen, but I'll say the number again, 515-239-5214. We'll give the candidates 2 minutes to answer the questions, and we'll kind of go in a round robin type of way, okay? All right, so we have our first question. Please state your name and state your question.
Mary Richards. I live at 720 Kellogg here in Ames. I have a tripartite question. And it has already been somewhat anticipated by at least one or two of you. The first is, do you personally acknowledge the critical nature of the rapid human-driven heating of our planet? Secondly, if you do, as a city council member, will you actively push for official city recognition of the climate crisis? And third, after that, will you make adopting steps to reduce carbon emissions in our community and to mitigate the unavoidable effects of the carbon that's already in our atmosphere major considerations in every city policy decision that you are a part of?
Why don't you stay there in case there's some questions they want to ask you. Let's start with Rachel and then we'll go down the line. Okay, Rachel?
Yeah. So absolutely, I personally acknowledge the gravity of climate change, not just globally, but locally in our community. And I would agree to push for official city recognition of climate change and the climate crisis. I think that climate change is an issue that we should be taking into account with all of our decisions, and it can help guide the decisions we make in the future, especially as we look at the 2040 plan as well. Our goal should be to be a carbon neutral city. So that's steps to reducing the carbon emissions, and that's sequestering the carbon that's already in our atmosphere as well. There's a lot that we as Ames can do in that aspect. Short-term solutions like waste reduction programs, municipal recycling, and composting, continuing to make our streets and our sidewalks more pedestrian and bike friendly. as well as continuing to transition to more renewable energy, which we're in a great place to do because we do have a municipally owned utility. This is also a factor in economic decisions. A lot of businesses want to be a part of a city that's sustainable and carbon neutral, and it will be a way that more businesses can come to develop in Ames as well. And so I definitely think that climate change is an issue that we need to continue to work on and have at the forefront of all of our decision making.
Chris, would you like to address that question?
Sure. To answer the first question, yes, it's really chemistry. So the next piece, it's a little more complicated than that to me. I think one of the things that we need to do is continue the commitment that we've had to mitigating some of the things that we do with carbon emissions. We've done that. We've done that with sustainability efforts to date. We've done that with converting the power plant from coal to natural gas. We're doing that with converting some of the Cyride buses to electric. We're doing that with the community solar project, just to name a few. Food waste diversion program is another one. So we're always looking for new ways to work towards more sustainable practices in the community. One of the things that we've done this year is funded a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, because and so I think it's very important and use that to be a guiding document in figuring out the easiest, quickest ways to do the initial mitigation. So absolutely.
Okay.
A critical issue for our time, and I'm sad to think of what I'm leaving my daughter in terms of our planet's condition, and I want to turn that around if possible. So pushing for recognition on the city level, yes, I'm supportive of that as well. Again, as was mentioned, we did commit to doing the greenhouse gas inventory, but I think we can do more. Next steps would be a climate action plan, which would detail the steps we need to do. So yeah, I'm totally on board with that as well. In terms of steps we could undertake, a lot of this has been mentioned, so I'll keep it quick. But the municipal end of that, that would be things like the electric buses or outfitting the fleet trucks with biofuel capabilities, broadening the energy portfolio. So again, the community solar project was one that I was supportive of when I first started on council, and I'm glad to see that finally underway. But then also, how do we guide private actions? So the municipal can only do so much, but a lot of the decisions we make will affect private decisions, and the main one of those that I see too, transportation systems, encouraging bike and pedestrian infrastructure, busing, any way to get us out of our individual car addiction, I guess you'd say, in this culture today. More electric charging stations, encouraging things like that. So that it strengthens our transportation network. And then reducing barriers to private solar, I think, is something we should look at too. So that's just a handful. There's a lot of things out there that have an effect on, how private individuals are contributing to the climate and the municipality too. And I am willing to look at them all.
Thank you. Timothy.
And you can call me Tim. I'm casual. Mary, thank you for your question, and thank you for your commitment to this issue. You've been a longstanding proponent of these matters. I, like my fellow candidates, I believe that there is a major climate catastrophe that is happening. As a community, we've actually already said very clearly that this is an important priority for the city. And a lot of people don't realize all the many things that we are already doing as a city. So if you take a look at the City of Ames website under sustainability, it's amazing all the initiatives that we've already undertaken. And I've spent some time comparing what we're doing here in Ames with the climate action plans that have been provided to me from peer communities. And I'm very proud of the track record we have. We share a sustainability coordinator with Iowa State, Mary Rankin, who is an expert in sustainability. And she advises us about the steps that we can be taking to coordinate with Iowa State and things that we can be doing to reduce the carbon footprint that we have. In addition to some of the things that Chris and Bronwyn have mentioned, one that I would add to it is we adopted a complete streets philosophy in our community. And part of that is to help encourage the community to become more user-friendly for bikes, for pedestrian and other forms of non-motorized traffic. I would also like to point out, I took a leading role in bringing up the conversation of the greenhouse gas inventory. This was something that hadn't been discussed. Mary was here. I said, hey, let's talk about that. And I want to point out something very important. That was a unanimous decision by the council to say, yeah, we need to move forward on that. So I'm very proud of the track record we have on sustainability. And I'm very encouraged with the direction. Thanks.
Thank you. And lastly, Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Mary, for your question. I personally do think that climate change is an issue that we absolutely have to address, not only for my generation, but for the generations that come after us. I think that the city should adopt a policy that recognizes that climate change is terribly important, and we should include it in our 2040 plan so that we do actually have a concrete set of steps we're taking as we move into the future. Things that I think we can do as a city to continue the progress that Tim mentioned are basic things like doubling the renewable energy that we use to cover our annual consumption by signing another purchase power agreement. Right now, 20% of our energy comes from wind. We can do that by signing another agreement. And not only do we benefit from doubling our energy from renewables, but it will come at a cheaper cost than the previous agreement. So we're not only benefiting financially, but we're benefiting in regards to our carbon footprint. I think that we also need to recognize that there's great steps. The League of Women Voters are currently reviewing the study that was conducted or being conducted on the Resource Recovery Center. It was a great step that the city took back in the 70s. I think that we need to look at upgrading or replacing that resource because it has diverted hundreds of thousands of pounds of reusable materials in the forms of metals and other hazardous materials from landfills. And I think that it's an incredible resource that we need to carry into our future. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Do we have another question from the audience? Please state your name and then your question.
My name is Dana Schumacher, and I'd like to ask the members of the panel what you believe the role of nonpartisanship is for members of City Council.
Chris, will you begin?
Sure. No, that's a great question. I think one of the things that I'm most proud of here is that role on City Council, that we aren't involved in partisan politics in our council roles. And so it's one of the strengths I think that I bring to this is that I'm pretty good at getting people to talk to each other and come up with compromises so that we can move things forward. I don't want to see anything get out too far to one side or another and stall things from happening. So it's an interesting question for me because I've been independent. I have not received any help from any party ever in any campaign that I've run. So I'm proud of that, and I like that it's that way.
Thank you. Bronwyn?
Yeah, so I would echo that. I've been really impressed with council's ability to make decisions in a nonpartisan manner, and I do think that's essential for a functioning local government. A lot of the decisions we make are about things so municipal, the party wouldn't necessarily have a stance anyway, I think, if it's about road improvements or, there's a lot of things where, it doesn't come down to party decisions necessarily, but even for things where you could get a shade of partisan influence, it's important, I think, to keep local government free of that. I mean, that's proven by the gridlock we're seeing at the state and national level too. So, I mean, if you want to see how not to get things done, I think they're showing us that. And I think a lot of that has to do with when you get into two, it's two right now. We have the two major parties. When you get really locked into those two ideologies, compromise just is difficult to come to, or you can't compromise with the other side for fear of angering your side. It just is, it leads to gridlock. And so I think to make decisions happen on the local level, it's important to make decisions from a lens of fact-finding and deliberation, but not necessarily from a party platform.
Thank you. Tim?
Dana, I love this question. Thank you for asking it. As I have so much I want to say on this. The United States has not been as divided as we are since the American Civil War. That's a fact. And I think there's a real revulsion to this at what's going on the federal and state level. And so local government is one of those few places where we're not wearing anyone's jersey. And I think people really like the fact that we function in a nonpartisan way. I am very proud of the way in which we function. Mayor Hala has done a fantastic job of leading us. We talk all the time about being able to disagree without being disagreeable. I am proud of that. I love these people. And there are times, though, I have to say, I love you guys, but I think you're crazy, and I have to go a different way. That's okay. That's why there are 6 of us up here. But I believe very strongly in keeping the parties out. That has not always been the case. When I ran initially 6 years ago, the Story County Democratic Party ran a candidate as a write-in at the last minute. And I'm very concerned that the parties stay out of this race. We need to stay nonpartisan, and I'd like to send a message as clear as I can to both parties. Focus on the partisan races. That's fine. You have enough to work on there, but leave the nonpartisan positions alone and let that function the way it has been. In fact, frankly, this is just a secret between us, right? Okay. I actually think we should expand the nonpartisan roles to the county level, because I really don't see a significant difference between what the county supervisors do and what we do. Imagine if we didn't have a partisan treasurer or an auditor. Most people don't know what those roles are anyway. And so I would love to see a nonpartisan Board of Supervisors and county officers. So I think your question is great. Maybe we'll talk more about it tonight.
Joe?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that a good idea is a good idea no matter where it comes from. So for me, partisanship doesn't come to bear when it comes to finding solutions to problems. So I think that it's incredibly important to have nonpartisanship, because for any other reason, it's simply that you can't put blinders on, because if you put your blinders on by having partisanship, you miss good ideas. So I think that it's incredibly important to, keep your eyes open so that you can make sure that you're making smart decisions for the city.
Rachel?
So I'll keep it short as well, because a lot of what I wanted to cover has already been said, but I value the nature of our nonpartisan council. I think it's the way that we can get a lot of decisions made and work together in that aspect. And this is also what I love, is that when talking to community members and students, it's not divisive. I get to welcome more people into the political process and help them learn about what our nonpartisan city council and even school board do for the city of Ames. And so I definitely respect the nature of the nonpartisan council. I'm committed to being nonpartisan myself, and hope that other people can learn from us and the ways that we make decisions working together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, another question?
Oh, okay.
You can't go home now.
Be thinking of your questions, and when you get ready, come up to the front so we know you have a
Hi,
question.
my name is Sue Ravenscroft. Do you want our address or no?
No.
You don't need it. Okay, thank you. So I moved here 21 years ago to be a professor at Iowa State. And when I moved here, it seemed that this was a town that had some economic integration. We're talking about nonpartisanship here. I now see a town 21 years later that's much more economically partisan. There are big houses, and there are very few of those little tiny houses. There are very few trailer parks, which may not be where most of us want to live, but where people with low income do live. I've seen a lot of low-income housing removed. I have not seen it replaced. And to me, that is part of economic development, having economic diversity in housing as well as income. And I fear that we are becoming an enclave for the well-off. So what would you do, and what have you done, those of you who have been on council, to actually promote low-income and moderate-income housing? Thank you.
Okay. Bronwyn, will you begin?
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. I think so. it's true that I think it is a resource that we need to protect, the houses that we have here in Ames that are small and are affordable for folks who are looking to buy a starter home, and then also the low to moderate income category, which is more clearly defined than just saying affordable, say. But for me, changes that we've made to protect housing stock that would be considered affordable, I think a lot of the work we did on the rental code, the rental cap was an attempt to do that, actually, struck down by the state, of course. But since then, we've tweaked the rental code again to try to, to balance prospecting for homes in our neighborhoods to make a profit, and then the needs of the residents, right? Same with, we recently talked about Airbnbs, and this was a point I had about Airbnbs too, is that we need to be careful not to cause a reason for people to prospect the homes we have left and turn them into an economic tool rather than a house for a resident, right? Which I think is an even more important need. So those are some of the issues that we've talked about where I think we've made a change, made a difference, and where we can still impact affordability of housing. And then the other would be considering new types of zoning or permissions in zoning that might allow for smaller lot sizes than we currently allow for alternative home styles, maybe like tiny houses, for example. You hear those a lot, or to allow for secondary dwelling units, perhaps, that would be smaller and smaller lot sizes and thus more affordable. But yeah, I do acknowledge that it's something we do need to keep looking at here in Ames. So thank you.
Yeah, Sue, again, very good question. And in the course of our discussion on the Ames 2040 plan, here very soon, we're going to be talking about the infill aspects. The growth of Ames is supposed to be 15,000 people by 2040. Where are we going to put those people? So we'll be looking at a combination of growth outward, but also looking at infill. And so the point that you raise, the phrase is oftentimes used as gentrification. And so we have already, as a council, raised this issue with RDG, the consultant that we're working with, that we want to have a robust conversation about this issue of losing that low to moderate income housing. So then your question is very timely. I fought hard for the rental housing cap. Bronwyn has mentioned this. We added 10,000 students in a very small amount of time, and that totally annihilated a large swath of housing that we had in Ames. I paid a big price for the rental housing cap. It was an opportunity for us to reach a compromise. I'm very proud of the decision that we made as a council. It was a very inclusive and robust conversation, and I'm so sad the legislature took that away from us. Ultimately, we're never going to be able to really make a dent in the affordability until we increase the supply. It's going to be very difficult for us to ever compete with the communities that are surrounding Ames in terms of the cost of housing. If that's the goal, to have housing the same cost as Nevada or Slater, I'm afraid that's going to be very difficult to achieve. So we're a substantial number of people. I mean, right now, Ames and commute to our community, and den in that. And I important work of Habitat for Humanity. The city is a very good partner with Habitat, and a lot of organizations will talk about affordable housing. They're getting it done.
Joe?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I personally lived that 8 years I've lived in Ames, struggling with the growing student population and watching rents rise and seeing homes turned into rentals to profit off of the demand. I think that we really do need to recognize that those affordable homes in our communities and those neighborhoods are an incredibly valuable resource, and we need to take steps to preserve them and to bring them back on the market for individuals to purchase as starter homes. There are not enough single-family homes in our community for young families and young professionals to purchase. I personally have tried to buy a home once, truly tried once. The other time it was just a dream. If you don't know the owner, if you don't know the realtor, you have almost no chance of getting the home, because that is how serious the market is constrained in our community. So I think that we need to find incentives, especially as we have a current larger supply than demand. We need to look to talk to those landlords that have those single family homes and get them off the market with a deed restriction or a housing covenant or some other zoning mechanism like Bronwyn talked about, so that they can be available as starter homes. I also think that we need to recognize that the apartments that we've constructed with the zoning that the council has pushed are actually really expensive, amenity-heavy apartments. We do not have affordable apartments in our community. We need to make sure that the apartments that developers bring to the table are affordable for the people who live in our community and for the wages they make in our community. If we are going to grow, we need to recognize that the community that exists needs to be invested in. That means that we do have to watch out for gentrification like Tim was talking about, but we absolutely need to look at infill first. RDG said close to 25% of the 15,000 residents we're expecting can live in existing Ames. That should be our first priority. We should not be looking at annexation and the development of large single-family homes like we've seen. We need to be making sure that we're focusing on developing our existing community first. Thank you.
Rachel?
Middle income people in our community available, but it also is for students and renters in our community as well to be able to have access to quality, affordable rental homes as well, or rental apartments. The reason that a lot of students move into neighborhoods surrounding our campus is because they aren't able to afford apartments in our community, and they're just trying to get by while they're at school and paying for that as well. And so affordable housing is an issue for people of all ages. And there is a lot that we can do to keep the housing that we have and continue to build more affordable housing as well. Part of that is with zoning, and part of that is with federal grants as well. But this is an issue that affects a lot of people in our community, and it's something that we should consciously be thinking about what we can do to help fix.
Thank you. And Chris?
All right. This is actually no way you can answer this in 2-minute question because there's really two pieces to it. We've talked about affordable housing. I like to split it into two categories. It's housing affordability and affordable housing. Affordable housing is something that's funded by CDBG or home funds, and that's roughly $2 million in grants that we get from the federal government each year. CDBG money can be used for sidewalks and infrastructure. Home funds can actually be used to build buildings. So this is the type of funding that we're looking to use for the 321 State Street project that we're in the process of developing. Now, to put this in context, the subsidy for each unit in that development is between $75,000 and $100,000. So that $2 million doesn't go very far. And to put that further in context, the total property tax that the city of Ames collects is about $30 million a year. The rest of the money beyond that in our budget has to do with utilities and other things where it's restricted spending. So the resources don't exist for us to make a sensible dent in that affordable housing issue. All right, I got 1 minute. I got to switch to housing affordability. The whole trailer parks and other things disappearing is the result of a lot of decisions of prior councils. That's something that kind of faded away in the collective consciousness. It's something that we need to look at. Tiny houses are kind of an interesting one because a lot of tiny houses don't meet current building codes with foundations and that kind of thing. So it's something to look at. It's looking at different products is something that we need to do to introduce different things that fit different price points in the market. Yeah, converting back to owner occupied is the easiest way for us to get that starter home back into the market. We cannot build houses in that price range. It's just not possible with the cost of labor, materials, and land. Time's up.
Thank you. Okay, do we have another question from the audience? State your name.
I'm Jan Flora, and I'd like to drill down a little bit more on the housing question. I don't believe that we can adequately provide housing for people who work and want to live in Ames simply by reducing the cost of building housing. In other words, there has to be some mechanism for subsidizing housing. And as Chris pointed out, the the home program is only a small piece of the solution as well. So my question is, what are the out of the box ideas that you have for whether it be subsidized housing or whether it be new forms of ownership or whatever, that would allow those people who want to live in Ames to actually live in Ames?
Okay, Tim, will you please start?
Do you have any other questions, Jan? Any other questions? No? I'll try this one. I'm just giving you a hard time. No, it's okay. I got it. I mean, every time I conduct a real estate closing for someone who's moving out of Ames and moving to Ankeny, we've lost their kids in our schools. We've lost their involvement in our churches and other civic organizations. We lose their involvement in the community. We lose their sales tax. There's a loss that we experience. So I completely agree. We need to find ways to capture more of that 1/3 who work in Ames but can't find housing here. So it's one thing to say, I agree with you. It's another thing to say, what do we do now? The subsidizing the housing is one that we actually have as an agenda item to take up at some point. So there's a developer who suggested exactly what you're suggesting, I think. And that is this Ankeny could be more involved in subsidizing the construction of housing. So they do it differently there. Here, the developer puts in the infrastructure and in Ankeny, the city pays for that. We can do that, but understand, folks, that's going to mean an increase to your property taxes. And so that's the kind of balance that we're going to have a community conversation about. So I think it's a very important one, Jan. I appreciate you asking that question. Other ways, in my opinion, really the only way we're going to make a dent in housing costs is by increasing the supply. If you look around Iowa, 2/3 of the counties in Iowa are declining in population. So there's lots of areas where declining population means declining property values. We have the opposite. Thank you.
Joe?
Yeah, so I think that, I agree with you. You can't necessarily find mechanisms that we're currently using to subsidize housing to an affordable cost. So some of the ideas that I have, back in 2014, I read the Building and Housing Code because I wanted to build tiny homes as a student. I was seeing rents being really high. I was seeing, my own pocketbook go more towards my housing than my own, paying for my groceries. So I looked at building homes. I looked at designing them myself. In fact, I still have the designs. So for me, it is going after those ideas that are being tried in other communities that we can try here, whether it's tiny homes, whether it's co-ops, apartment co-ops, so that we can potentially provide housing for elderly folks that isn't some of the expensive communities that we have. Equally, we need to see some of the housing that we have, or we need to see some apartments that come to our community, recognize that they can't really provide all of the amenities that some of the places, especially around the campus town area, have included, so that we can actually provide affordable housing for them. I think that encouraging and having really serious conversations with developers, with other developers that aren't necessarily in our community right now, to come with those ideas and to work with us on those ideas to make them achievable is really the only way that we can actually create affordable housing in Ames.
Okay, Rachel?
So a lot of the ideas are very tentative because it is a hard question. I would like to focus on the zoning aspect of it. And if we are able to decrease the lot size, there are a lot of places in Ames where affordable housing could be built. There are different changes to our zoning code and our building codes that maybe could bring some of these out-of-the-box things onto the table. And so I would love to work with members of the community that have thoughts about things Ames could do to better this aspect.
Chris?
There is no magic bullet to solving this problem. The community that figures out how to solve this problem needs to patent it and sell it. This is not a local issue. It's a national issue. So everything that we've come to talk about in trying to fix this moves the needle a little bit. And so those are all the things that we need to do. But to think that we're going to be able to make substantive changes without unintended consequences in the market, it's going to be really challenging for us to do. You constrain lot size. You may have landowners that choose not to sell. You may have bigger houses put on those lots. I mean, there's just lots of things to think through as we go through the process of trying to figure out how to do that. The federal money, like I said before, is important to us in doing something. We can't do nothing. But we're also competing against nearby communities that have significantly lower costs of living. You can buy a house in Colo for $60,000. And we can't compete with that. Now, the interesting piece about that is that has environmental issues too. So now you have somebody commuting back and forth. And so that's not necessarily something that we want to have happen either. But that's the economic reality of the way things are. We can't build a $60,000 house here. We can't sell a lot for $60,000 here. So doing the things that we've all talked about here are all the things that need to be on the table for us to look at. But we're going to be moving forward, but making wholesale changes to the situation in Ames is, I think, like Tim said, going to be driven by supply. One of the problems that we've had with housing costs over the last 10 years is the enrollment growth that has put incredible pressure on the housing stock and the housing prices in the community. Now that we've seen enrollment decline slightly, you're starting to see that ease, especially as apartments construction has caught up with that. So some of the artificial constraints that we saw there with supply are not going to exist going forward. And so we'll see some relief there as well.
Okay, last one, Bronwyn.
Yeah, that's a good question. In terms of subsidizing, as was mentioned before, our main method of subsidizing the low to moderate income housing is CDBG and home funds, and that will pretty much be dedicated to 321 state for the near future. And that's only, I forget, 30 houses approximately. So thank you.
Sorry.
You're fine. So it's not enough to make a dent in the incoming 15,000 we're going to see between now and 2040. And again, I tend to agree with what's been said by Tim and others that supply is really the key here. Some of the decisions we've made, I think, are good steps in that direction. So that downtown Gateway Commercial District, the rezoning of that area in the hopes that we will get a number of what we would call like workforce style apartments rather than student targeted. But increasing the density in the core is the way to do it, right? So that supply issue. Increasing density, both through zoning changes like that, which will sort of transform that area if all goes well, to the other things that have also already been mentioned that aren't allowed now. Smaller lot sizes, accessory dwelling units where you have your main house on a lot, but then might also have like a smaller unit, But also you made a good point, and that's new forms of ownership. I don't think people think about that very often, but there are concepts of cooperative housing where people might buy into a property together, or a group of people might buy into an apartment unit together and run it as a cooperative. Those things aren't really thought of commonly, I think, here. And so those are things maybe we could educate people more about their ability to purchase properties cooperatively or as a group where maybe they don't know that it's an option now. So yeah, just some ideas.
Okay, we'll transition to the next question. Please state your name and then your question.
Hi, my name's Seba. I'm a student at Iowa State, junior. And I had a question about safety in Ames. So Ames is a pretty safe town, but there have been several alarming events that have happened in recent memory. Like just last week, there was a stabbing on there's a stabbing on Duff Avenue as the woman was going for a run. And so as a student who spends a lot of late nights, both on campus and in Ames overall, I just wanted to see what you guys would do to improve the safety in this town. Thank you.
Okay, Joe.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So really, to recognize the issue that we're dealing with is how do we get our police officers to be working on maintaining a safe environment and a safe community. So for me, it's creating some resources that currently police officers are dedicating their time to that necessarily make it unavailable for them to be able to be out making sure that these kinds of crimes aren't occurring. So one instance is we really need to recognize that our police officers do a fantastic job interacting with our homeless population, but we need to recognize that we could take steps to make sure that our officers aren't having to, say, patrol parks and find that shelter that has a light out because they know that there's someone trying to go to sleep under there. So we need to develop resource officers that can either manage that, or we need to actually work to address the homelessness population in Ames permanently by creating a system that builds our community to zero, so that we actually recognize that homelessness is an issue. Not the individual is not the issue, but the homelessness itself is the issue. Equally, I think that we have officers doing a fantastic job interacting with our students, whether it's when they're creating a nuisance by throwing a party. And I think that we need to develop, again, a resource officer or some other position where the student doesn't feel threatened when the person approaches the door or the home, because it's not a police officer carrying a firearm, because the person is there not to, dispense tickets, even though our police officers currently don't. They do a fantastic job, like I've mentioned, but we need to develop a system that recognizes that these people just need to be told that they need to cut out what they're doing. They don't need a police officer there. That police officer needs to be somewhere else doing their job, protecting and serving our community. And again, they do an amazing job already, but we really need to lighten their load so that they can do a better job in the aspect that you're talking about in protecting our citizens, our residents, pardon me.
Thank you. Rachel?
So something that I think that the city of Ames is doing great already to address safety concerns is the annual safety walk. So the community gets together to walk and look at where unsafe areas are, where maybe lighting concerns on sidewalks could be addressed, things like that to make our community safer. And so I'd love to continue doing that while on council and get more people involved in making sure that our sidewalks and streets are safe as night. I also think it's about publicizing resources that we have, whether that's at the university or at the city level, for students and lifelong residents. So on campus, there's Safe Ride, where students can take a car home from the library or other places on campus if they feel unsafe. Just having the adequate resources to equip those tools, and also having adequate public transportation at night so people can get home from various areas would be some of the things that I would propose to continue expanding in the future.
Chris?
Yeah, so every violent event we have in the community is unfortunate, and you hate to see anything happen here. And with the murder a year ago, that was one of the worst days that I've had serving on council, was knowing that that happened in our community. But know that we did respond to that. We took steps to widen the trail, make it harder for people to hide in the trees. We've expanded our path lighting in a number of places. We've also increased funding to the police department for mental health issues. Most of the calls to the Ames Police Department deal with mental health issues. And so having those resources available, or having additional resources available, helps with that in their dealings with the community. And that's proven to be very effective in dealing with some people in the public that are going through a crisis. Really, like was said, we have a very safe community. So just doing things, educating, getting people out, getting the police officers out in the community, developing relationships, that keeps things from happening as well. Certainly the homeless population that was involved with the murder, but is that the reason why we have violent crime? I don't think so. So I think that's something to pay attention to, but it's not a focus of the police department to make the community safe.
Bronwyn?
Yeah, a couple thoughts on safety. For one, when you're talking about safety against a random act of violence, like the murder last year or the recent stabbing we had, I think There are a couple things, there are the environmental design aspects that we talked about. So like lighting and path clearing and, the Ames app that you can report streetlights out and things like that. The safety walks that we do. Those all improve the environmental safety, having light easily accessible and people can't sneak up on you and things like that. But I think Chris is exactly right in that the mental health resource part of that is key too, because I think a lot of violent crimes and probably substance abuse issues are deeply rooted in mental health issues. And so really it's up to the municipality, the local resources now. The state has reduced funding over time for mental health care. And so it's up to us to pick up that slack, basically. So I think that's a big piece of it. And pooling together the resources of all the agencies that work towards mental health awareness and mental health, pooling those resources together and finding out how we can collaborate and better use our funding is probably the most key thing for safety. And then there's the whole traffic safety element too. So we did also recently undertake a traffic safety study along Lincoln Way. And we've had some good results with changes we put in there. So with some traffic light timing changes and crosswalk additions and some other environmental changes, we looked at the numbers that came in and we've really improved safety in the last year along that stretch of Lincoln Way. So that's another sort of element of safety I see in the community.
Okay, Tim?
It's a great question, Emma. Thanks for asking this. Last week, I was in Dubuque for the Iowa League of Cities conference, and I had an opportunity to interact with a city council member from a peer community. And I asked her, I said, tell me about what are your top concerns in your community? And the number one concern she had was crime. And that was sort of jarring to me because I wouldn't say that that's a number one concern of you folks. But in many communities in Iowa, this is a major concern. Now, we think about safety a lot around this dais because families all over the Midwest and all over the world will send their children to our community. And our number one job is to keep them safe. And so Celia's tragic murder was so jarring to us in part because it was so rare. And so Chris pointed out, it was a devastating day for our police, for our city leadership, and for the entire community. I think Ames is a very safe place, but there are things that we're doing. In our last fiscal budget, we've added an additional police officer so that we have not just one police officer, but two that work with the high school and the middle school. I think that was an important step. We see our relationship with the schools to be a very important partnership. And so juvenile crime is a concern, and we try to work with that. Bronwyn and Chris have talked about efforts in mental health. We also have a very close working relationship with Iowa State. So our Ames Police Department and the ISU public safety work very closely hand in hand. I think there's also more that we can do from a human services aspect to improve the path opportunities that people have when they come out of jail or prison. It's amazing the challenges, if you come out of jail, the challenges you have at finding housing, finding a job. And I think there's more we can do as a community to help create paths for those people. Thank you for the question.
Okay. We have a writing question from three ladies, Carolyn, Becky, and Mary, who ask, are charging stations for electric cars in your plan for Ames? And I'd like Rachel to address that question first.
So I'm not sure if any charging stations are being planned for Ames, but I would encourage planning more in the future. I think the more electric cars that we can have that aren't emitting carbon would be great for our city overall, especially as climate change is such a pressing issue for the future. And in addition to those charging stations, continuing to work on our city fleet of Cyride buses, converting those to electric, as well as some of our trucks to biodiesel, other cleaner fuels, things like that would all be great assets to the city of Ames.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, so the city does have a couple of charging stations. There's one over by Electric Services. There's one in the parking lot to the west of City Hall here. One of the interesting challenges about charging stations in the city is that for private developers to install them, they have to give that electricity away. There's a state law that says you cannot sell electricity because if you do, you're a utility. And most people probably aren't willing to become a utility to have a charging station that's, you're going to sell electricity for $1 or $2 at a time. So that's one of the constraints that we're up against that. Now, can the city put in more and pay for it? That's something that I think we'll trend towards going towards the future. You look at other private enterprises, though. Hy-Vee is putting in Tesla charging stations in a number of places. And I think you'll see some other things pop up. You need to make sure that we have a network of them because without a network, you don't get utilization. That network might include a charging station at your home. So maybe as part of our smart energy program, we need to create rebates for charging stations in your house. They're not free to install. There's a cost associated with that. So that's something that we could pursue to at least, for the people that don't drive their cars very much over the course of a day, to be able to charge a car overnight and drive to and from work. I would fit into that category, and I would love to be able to do that someday as soon as they make an electric car that can tow a 14,000-pound trailer.
Bronwyn?
Yeah, so I mean, I would be in favor of adding more municipal charging stations or figuring out ways we can incentivize others to do it. So working out a partnership with a developer where somehow we incentivize the station and are in charge of selling the electricity. I'm sure that an arrangement could be figured out to encourage those, and for private individuals too, some system to encourage charging stations, because I think it's exactly right that we need a strong network of them. I recently visited Norway, and it was amazing how many electric cars were on the road. So many, over half easily, lots and lots and lots. But they had charging stations all over the place too, which you'd need. And I think if Ames gets out in front of that, we're in a good position because people need a place to charge up. If they're traveling or something like that, they might need a place to charge. And so it could be a way to get people into town too. And you could strategically place the charging stations at points of interest in town. And that would, do a dual benefit of providing the station, but also showing people what Ames has to offer and, increasing electric car charging tourism. It's a tough crowd tonight. So those are some of my ideas. But again, I'm in favor of seeing more because I think we need to make that network more robust if people are actually going to invest in electric cars.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I think the question is interesting because it says about what we prioritize and value as a community. I like this question because I had a high school student send me an email. And they do this every once in a while. There'll be a middle school or high school teacher that has as a project that you have to email a city council member. So we get barraged all of a sudden with 50 different emails about different questions. And but I had a high school student ask me about this, and it sort of intrigued me. And I realized I really don't know how many charging stations we have, nor do I really know what our peer communities have. So how many stations does Ankeny have? How about West Des Moines or Iowa City or Cedar Rapids? So I went on a little bit of an exploration to find out. And what I realized is that Ames has about the same number of charging stations as our peer communities. But I said, well, okay, that describes the way it is now, but what should it be? And so I had some conversations with city staff, and at least at this point, there's an interest in waiting a bit longer to see what the private sector does. So charging stations, and correct me if I'm screwing this up, but come in sort of two different varieties. There's a kind that takes a long time to charge the car, and there's a kind that's a much faster charge. And the more faster charge type of stations are pretty expensive. And so the staff is wanting to take, at least at this point, a more wait and see approach. But it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. And so we can get out in front and try to stimulate the use of electric cars by leading and putting electric car charging stations out. I favor that, but I wanted to also pay attention to my staff and think about ways of doing this strategically. Thank you.
Joe?
Yeah, I think that the construction of electric charging stations is definitely something the city should be looking into. I think that I agree with Tim. It's kind of a chicken and egg thing, but we should very much be leaning more towards being the egg. We should definitely be putting the stations out there because there are a lot of electric cars already in our community. We see them everywhere. At least I do as a Siride driver. Sometimes they get in my way, but ultimately, I think that we do need to be recognizing that there are ways that the city can lead by partnering with organizations like Hy-Vee, which does have charging stations at their West Des Moines location, we can be putting those fast charging stations that do create kind of a cost prohibition at our Hy-Vee locations, so that we do have a public option for our electric vehicle charging tourists. I think that ultimately we recognize it's coming, so we need to make sure that our city is leading rather than simply following behind everyone. Ultimately, we do want to encourage people to have their private charging in their homes, and I think that potentially a rebate like Chris was talking about would be a fantastic idea. Thank you.
Okay. We have the opportunity for another question. Please state your name before your question.
My name is Dirk Deem. I'm a resident of Ames and have been since 2002. As several of you know, I'm also a political science professor at Iowa State, and that informs this question. This may sound like a little bit of a professorial philosophical question. I mean it very practically. I'm interested in hearing from all of you, and especially for the people in the room, what your concept is of representation. I teach my students something that Tip O'Neill famously said a long time ago, that all politics are local. The problem is they're not. Most of my students know a lot about the current controversies of national politics. They know nothing of what is happening in their own home community. And I'm interested in how you would go about representing the people of Ames in doing your jobs and what your concepts of that role are. Thank you.
Chris, will you begin?
Sure. That's a great question. So one of the interesting pieces about how Ames is arranged is we have 4 ward seats, we have 2 at-large seats. And so certainly, personally, I campaign and get elected in Ward 4. I would tell you that there are very few Ward 4 issues. We have Ames issues. And so it's important to represent and listen to the entire community. And we take input, and I take input from anybody. You'll hear probably from some other council members, we don't get enough input. We would welcome more. It's very important to take in the information. It's very important to make data-driven decisions. And I think that we've done that in tackling a number of things. It's interesting in that Ames is not very homogeneous. And in fact, if you break it down into some of the smaller groups, they're not homogeneous either. You can't just say an Iowa State student. That's a broad spectrum of person also. Certainly there are a lot of common issues among students. There's a lot of common issues amongst all the residents in the community. So I do think that it's very important that we pay attention to what our decisions do, what sort of unintended consequences they may have for other groups beyond the one that is championing the issue that we have. Because we really truly don't want to leave anybody behind on purpose. Or not on purpose through an unintended consequence. So representation is something that I take to heart.
Bronwyn.
I love this question. So I don't know if you remember, but the main question of my thesis when I studied political science at Iowa State was whether representatives do their job, if they have a philosophical difference between doing what people want them to do or doing what is best for the people, even if it's not what people want them to do. And we surveyed a bunch of Iowa communities, and the data didn't show that there was any difference in how a representative viewed their role. But I think it's because you view your role as both, right? So there are some issues we hear a lot of feedback on. And for an issue like that, I might have an idea for what is best perhaps for the community. But if I start to get a lot of feedback that tells me, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm not seeing something, I'm getting a lot of feedback on another point of view perhaps, that's going to make me stop and, really reflect on that and see, sort of make sure that decision is the right one. So in that case, you're sort of responding to public opinion maybe, or public discourse, I guess you would say. But I think a lot of times we have to make decisions that no one cares about, right? So when we're deciding about whether to upgrade the wastewater treatment plant biodigester so that it can generate electricity. Like, nobody came out swinging on that one. But it's important. And so you
I thought
still.
it was interesting.
I did too. I was fascinating, but it was just us, I think, that thought that. But so a lot of times you are making decisions about topics that don't draw a crowd or that our people are not in tune with, but they still do make an impact. In a case like that, yeah, you're making decisions sort of based on what you assume is best for people, maybe with or without feedback. So, I mean, I think that's sort of my take on representation, is that we're trying to make decisions for the best of the Ames community broadly, but are responsive to feedback when we get it, right? And so I think, yeah, that's sums it up.
Great. Dirk, thanks for the question. It's a brilliant question. So I have a couple different prongs to this answer. The first is I have made forays into trying to understand this thing called social media. Now, I don't know how many people in this room are involved in Facebook, but I pay very close attention to the Ames People Facebook group, and my wife thinks this is crazy, and it probably is. There are 22,000 members of this Facebook group. And some of the times they just want to talk about why we need an Olive Garden. That's not particularly interesting to me. But there are issues sometimes that surface in this social media group. And I think it's incumbent upon us as elected officials to pay attention to resources like social media where we can learn what people are talking about. This issue really goes to the heart of what I was talking about earlier about the polarization that's taken place. One of the things that I ask prospective candidates is how many friends they have who are of the opposite political party. And usually the answer is none. So I think it's incumbent upon us to have friends who vote differently than us, who look differently than us, who believe differently than us, who think differently than us. And I would say the same would hold true for you. So if all of your friends look like you, think like you, and believe like you, I want to say this in a loving way, it would be good to get some new friends. And that's a very important way for us to keep a handle on different parts of the community. If we're only listening to people who are in our peer group, I'm afraid we're going to lose out on people in the community. I also spend a lot of time door knocking. That's an important way for me to hear the needs of the community. But something else, Dirk, that I'd point out, our staff is very intentional on many of the major issues that we do. We send our staff out into the community to do outreach, to listen to what the community is saying.
Okay, Joe.
Yeah, so obviously everyone has kind of talked about how we need to be synthesizers of public opinion, of the voices that are being raised about particular issues, and that's incredibly important. But ultimately, you're electing us to do a job. You're electing us to think about housing in a way that not everyone thinks about it. You're electing us to recognize that, you know, the person, you know, someone who works at Hy-Vee doesn't have the time or the energy or the financial incentive to look at and think about housing in a way that otherwise might not be thought about. So we are supposed to be spending our time looking for answers that might not be readily available, that might not be right on the surface. And yes, there is fantastic staff at this in the city that does amazing work, but the city council absolutely has to be always looking for those solutions. It includes communities, it includes participating in, you know, national conferences to find ideas that other communities are doing, but it is our job to recognize that you don't have the time as residents to delve into issues, and you're electing me to do that for you. And that is exactly what I want to do. I want to delve into these issues. I want to find the solutions on every issue that is important to you and the ones that you don't necessarily think about, including the, you know, the hydrostatic precipitator at the Ames utility power plant. So that is exactly what I'd want to do as your representative. Thank you.
Thank you. Rachel.
So at the root of representation is who are we representing in Ames? Some of those are people that have lived in Ames their entire life, like me. Some of those are new people coming to Ames for work that just want to start their families. And some of those are students that come to our town and live here and are a part of our community for 4 years or even more. And so my concept of representation would be that I would be able to represent both parts of our community. So we have a lot of Ames issues, which is right, but there are a lot of issues that students have as well, which those might be that they don't even understand how to get to City Hall or what issues on the City Council affect them in their everyday life. And so one of my favorite part about running this campaign and talking to people in Ames is educating them on the issues in Ames and helping them understand that City Council affects everyone who lives in Ames, whether they're here for a short amount of time or whether they've lived here their entire lives. And so that representation is being able to meet people where they're at and helping them understand what our community can do to serve them better. And as a student, I would be able to meet those people where they're at. As a community member, I'm able to door knock and meet people at community events. Even if people who aren't in the 4th Ward see me, I say, well, if I'm on council, I'll be representing you too. So I'd love to hear about your issues. And so that's the way that I feel I could represent all of Ames. Half of the population that is only here for a shorter amount of time, but still belong and matter. And then the population that's pretty consistent here as well.
We have another write-in question. This one comes from Carolyn Kloss. She asks, we need an indoor pool for the Ames community. How are you going to make this happen? Bronwyn, how are you going to make it happen?
Oh, good.
Yeah, how are we going to make this?
Yeah, good question. Well, as you likely know, we recently did see the failure of the bond referendum for the Healthy Life Center. And that was meant to be our attempt at an indoor pool. So I think, we still need one, yes. And it just means now going back to the drawing board and thinking of what kind of a facility we can afford, where we can afford to put it, what kind of a bond issue we could actually get to pass. I think those are all things we're going to need to think about as we move forward and look for a suitable replacement for the current municipal pool, which goes away when the high school renovates. So,
Tim?
So the Healthy Life Center vote was a hard debate in our community. Many people in this room voted against it, and you were very passionate about that. And there were people in this room who thought it was a wonderful idea, and you were passionate about it. And it didn't pass because we as a council weren't able to make the case to the community. We're still in the process of trying to understand what we can learn from this experience. And then we could talk more about that if there's an interest in sort of Monday morning quarterbacking that question. But in terms of going forward, it's difficult. I think it would be wise for us to take a little bit of time, catch our breath as a community before we put another bond before the voters. So I am not in favor of doing this right away. I don't think the community has an appetite for this conversation right away. So I think it'd be wise to wait a few months before doing this. The challenge is that Bronwyn indicated, is that we're going to lose our indoor pool. And so families who have children they want to take to swim lessons, people who want to do lap swimming, we're going to be without an indoor pool, I believe, for a period of time. The sky's not going to fall. It won't last forever, but I believe there will probably be some gap. But there are some very weighty issues to work through, as Bronwyn pointed out, and we don't have those answers. And so we'd be working with a consultant to think through that next step. Thanks.
Joe?
Yeah, so ultimately, I don't have an answer for you on this. I think that, we need to delve into it. We really need to figure out what's going on. Obviously, the city and the residents have they've voiced their opinion and said that referendums, raising property taxes is just not on the table. We've seen it with the water treatment plant. We saw it with the high school. Right now, the city can't stomach the idea of seeing property taxes go up. So if we are going to move forward with an indoor pool, we need to look for different financial options. We need to potentially talk with some private developers that are looking at building some hotels in our community, maybe look at attaching a rec center or an indoor pool to a hotel, making it a public space. I think that these are just some of the ideas that I'm thinking about when it comes to addressing the fact that we're going to lose our indoor pool. But I think that it is something that we need to recognize, that residents have made their voices heard, that right now property taxes are, they don't want to see their property taxes go up.
Rachel?
So what I liked about the Healthy Life Center was that it brought a lot of different groups of people together to put together kind of a visionary concept that would make Ames's quality of life better for a lot of people who lived here, and to help make Ames a healthier city. I do think that in looking for options for an indoor pool in the future, we should continue bringing people together to get the best option for our city, whether that's another bond referendum. I do agree with waiting a little bit to pursue that option as well.
Okay, Chris?
Well, like Tim and Bronwyn, council in the city is still we're licking our wounds on this one. So I would tend to agree that tackling it in the near term is going to be something that's pretty challenging for us to A, do, and B, take back to the community to take action on it. I understand why things happen, but one of the things that I did champion several years ago was trying to figure out how to have a joint school and city facility. That ship unfortunately has sailed. There's nothing we can do to change that. Some interesting pieces about how we look at options. We'll need to build a pool. We'll need to do it as a public institution. We have bidding rules. One of the ideas that came up somewhere along the line was partnering with the racket club or the fitness club. We can't just partner with somebody in the private sector to do that. We have to go through a bidding process and come up with something that works on that front. So we do have some constraints on that front. Going back to the voters with another bond referendum, we know where people stand. We know that a swimming pool is going to have the same operating deficit that basically the Healthy Life Center did. So we have to go through and figure out where we are on that, what the community is willing to support, and how we come up with a facility to meet those needs in a cost-effective way that the public's going to support. And we just didn't have it this time around for the Healthy Life Center.
Good. Do we have another question from the audience? Sure.
Hi, Sue Ravenscraft again. And I've heard some references to experts. We're going to have an expert look at the emissions, and we're going to have an expert look at swimming pools. So I have a question for you folks, because I know some engineers, I know some experts in energy engineering. Running a utility is really a complicated thing. And you folks have a lot to do. You have a lot of issues that you address. Do you really want to be the board of directors of a publicly owned utility, or should we consider having an independent board of experts run our municipal utility? Is it time to do that with all the issues facing us as we think about climate change? Are you really the right people to be doing it? And I'm not trying to belittle your interest or your dedication. Just, I think it's a massively complicated task. So when do you hire experts, and when do you appoint a board, a permanent expert board? Thank you.
Tim, will you begin?
Well, thanks, Sue. I think that our public utilities have served the community very well. When you look at Ames compared to those peer communities who don't have a public utility, they buy all their energy off the grid. I think we're much more energy independent. I'm very pleased with the process we went, for example, in converting coal to natural gas. We do have the URAB board that makes certain recommendations to the council. We have a very high quality city staff. Then the vast majority of issues is guiding the council in making good decisions. In scenarios where it's beyond their expertise, we do reach out to using consultants. So respectfully, I don't see a need to make a change. I think what we're doing is serving the community very well. And that's really, for me, the poll star. Are the people of Ames being well served by the process we have? And I think it is.
Joe?
Yeah, so this is actually one of the things that I think is incredibly important for our community as we move forward. I think that we need to recognize that the city council slows down the Ames utility by having to have every issue brought before the council, or large issues brought before the council, and have it approved. The city council often acts as a rubber stamp. because obviously, as Tim was saying, we trust the people who are running it. Domcom is doing a fantastic job. The people on URAB do a great job of understanding the issues before us and making fantastic recommendations. I think that we just create more efficiency in our community by giving the board or giving the utility its own board and having them, every 2 years or twice every year meet with the city council to make sure that everything's in order. Right now, Mary Greeley Medical Center operates in this exact fashion. There's absolutely nothing preventing us from having the Ames Electric Utility, follow suit. It would be an incredible opportunity to make us more efficient as a community, and we'd have those experts doing the work that they need to be doing and being able to make decisions in a timely manner rather than always having to come to council to get approval.
Rachel?
So I definitely would support having an independent, nonpartisan board to govern our municipal utility. I think that we can bring a lot of experts in our community together with the council to make those decisions, as well as making them in a more efficient way. I'm an engineer, and with that technical background, even I don't think that it would be as good for council to make those decisions as experts in our community. And I know that a board would be able to make those decisions efficiently and well and for the betterment of our city.
Okay. Chris?
So I guess I'll lead off with, we're talking about public utility. We're talking about the electric services. We actually have 3 utilities in the city of Ames. We have water and we have a sewer utility also. They all operate as independent utilities with their own revenue bonds, their own funding. So I guess where I'm heading with this, and again, with all due respect, I'm not sure how this adds experts to the mix. We have URAB as a board to make recommendations to council, and certainly we're not experts. URAB's not experts, but how do we have an independent board for the electric utility that's made up of a broad cross-section of the community that's an expert in this? So I guess I'm not sure I really see this as a driving need for the electric utility to pursue at this point.
Okay, thank you. Bronwyn?
That's a good question. I mean, I'd be willing to consider it or think about it. But I too think the utility has served the customers pretty well. And so I'd have to hear an argument too for what a board could do differently, I guess, or what changes they could affect. Because I think a lot of the decisions that we need to make about our electric utility that will affect things like, say, climate or carbon emissions, those will be policy decisions that the council will want to visit anyway. So, yeah, some of the bigger picture drivers, like behind why we would want to steer the electric utility one way or another, but I'd be willing to consider it, I guess.
Okay. All right. Do we have another question from the audience? Come to the mic, please.
Okay, so hi again, Seba, not Emma. So students who are renting in Ames are renting for the first time in their life, and many of them have horror stories about renting from their landlords, and they end up getting taken advantage of. So what would you do to have fair landlord and tenant relationships? Thank you.
Okay, Joe, would you answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So I personally experienced this. I've had landlords who don't address mold until the day before the inspector shows up. I've had issues with, a heavy rainstorm, having the drains back up into my basement, and the landlord simply saying, jam a tennis ball in the drain. That'd be great if I had one, but it'd be better if he came and helped me. I think that, there is a lot of good work we've been doing. I think that right now, the Campus and Community Commission is working to build kind of a solution to this that allows us to address things like mold, things like vermin. And I really think that we could look at putting a provision in our city ordinances in the rental code that would make it an addressable issue, that being mold and rodents. I think that students, renters overall, students especially, like you're saying, being 18, renting for the first time, should absolutely be informed of their rights. I think that the city does have a fairly substantial rental code to protect students, but often students don't know it exists or don't recognize the resources available to them. I think that we need to potentially look at giving them, enough opportunity to recognize those, whether it's attaching a tenant's rights document to every lease. It's a simple step that doesn't invade on anyone's privacy or doesn't require landlords to do anything other than simply print an extra page on their lease document. I think that ultimately right now, there are just things in our community that haven't been addressed. It is currently not acceptable for landlords to require a professional carpet cleaning at the end of the lease, yet almost every lease in our community has one in it. So we clearly need to be doing more, and there's some very simple steps that we can be taking to address it. Thank you.
Hey, Rachel.
I, as a student, definitely understand the issues of renting properties in Ames, and I think there's a big power imbalance between the tenant and the landlord, whether that's a student or just another renter in our community. And so I would be supportive of a tenant's bill of rights that would help the tenants know what their rights are in a renting situation, and hopefully educate them so that they wouldn't be taken advantage of in any situation. I would also say that for rental housing, making sure that our rental housing is up to code and safe for our renters is a priority as well. Having mold and vermin or even broken windows, things like that aren't energy efficient. And so having rental housing that's safe for all renters in our community is a priority as well. And hopefully that would help diminish some of the horror stories that I hear every day from students and other renters.
Thank you. Chris?
This is a complex issue because at the top of this list is the fact that the city does not govern tenant-landlord relations. The state does. So there are a number of things that we're not permitted to get involved with. There are a number of things that we are, but that's kind of the guiding path that we'll head down, or that we've headed down. There's nothing we can do about some of that. Now, that being said, we have made strides in doing some of the things that we have. We've hired an additional inspector. We've graduated permits based on past performance, letters of compliance. So the fewer problems that you have, the longer your letter of compliance gets issued for. Mold is kind of an interesting one. And we've visited that in the last few months because of some complaints that we've received from the public. Mold, to write an ordinance around or rules around, OSHA actually doesn't even have a mold exposure standard. So certainly it's something that has health risks, but quantifying it, it is challenging. I think just through the inspections process is the best way to do that. Now, also, the Iowa State used to have an office that dealt with a lot of this. So one of the things that the city actually has a long-standing problem with is communicating with the community and communicating with the students. So if there's a way that we could partner with the university to disseminate that kind of information for people living off campus, I see that as being something that would be an easy way to get people a list of things that they should be expecting or that they're legally required to be provided by their landlord. So that piece of it, I think, is something that we could pursue also.
Thank you. Bronwyn?
I think a lot of the issues between landlords and tenants can come down to educating, right? So educating tenants in what their rights are, what landlord responsibilities are. Same on the flip side, educating landlords about their responsibilities, owning a rental house and running a rental house. The city has a great website, Rent Smart Ames. You can check that out, and that's got great resources for tenant rights. It's got a section on conflict resolution. It talks about what to do if you perceive an issue, passing that on to inspections. So it shows the avenues to deal with rental issues and some other education on there. So I would highly recommend checking out Rent Smart Ames, but also we need to be doing a better job of promoting that in general. So not just for folks who stumble across it, but telling students about it and other renters, right? Not just students, although they're a large chunk of our rental population. But trying to get that information out, and again, maybe collaborating with Iowa State in a more robust way to do that, I think is a good step. We also did recently, I was talking a while back about some rental code changes we made. One was actually adding a new tool to our toolbox of rental enforcement options. And that is the option for what they call rent abatement. If if the landlord is in violation of serious, health and safety risk, things like that. So that rent abatement, if it's employed by inspections, would mean that a tenant wouldn't have to pay until certain issues of a significant enough nature in terms of safety are addressed. So I think that tool in the toolbox will be helpful too. So again, I think mostly education about the resources that are out there and the avenues that are out there already. And getting out in front and telling students about that, maybe when they're first coming to town, or trying to get that information in their hands sooner.
Thank you.
So
Tim.
there's a lot of good things that have been shared. I'm going to add to some of the concerns that tenants have. I have a landlord client I'm working with, and he's ready to send out leases now for next year starting August 1st. That's craziness to me. And so that puts students in a major, major corner trying to figure out what they're going to do next August. And so there are these horror stories. I believe that the vast majority of landlords do a good job. There are these anecdotal stories that drive us crazy. There are some market forces at work. We went through a substantial period of time when landlords were able to command double-digit increases in rents. And they didn't have to put a dime back into their units. And you know what? They didn't. And all over this community, you see rundown houses where you can just tell the landlord was just milking this property for every dime he could get out of it. Well, that's changed. And you see for rent signs now all over the place. And so this is giving the consumer, the tenant, more options. That's a good thing. So there are some things that are important forces for the law to do, and certainly we want to try to build those things up. But there are some market forces that are at work that I think will have a dramatic impact. And I'm hoping we'll see some money being placed back into some of these rundown facilities and see some improved landlord-tenant relations.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one last question. Okay.
From John Clark. So from time to time, the city council is asked by a developer of some project for tax exemption as an incentive. And what are or what should be the criteria for making that decision on whether or not a project should receive a tax exemption incentive?
Let's start with Rachel.
So I would look very closely at the benefit that developer would bring to the community. I think that a lot of the places that our city council funding could go into amazing projects like parks or our library or other things that would add a lot to the community for Ames. And so I would look very carefully at what that business has to offer our community and weigh that with where the money could be spent in other aspects.
Chris?
So this is a big question. There's lots of different projects that we undertake that we get asked to provide tax incentives for. It might be a building project. It might be to install infrastructure for a company that wants to expand. But one of the guiding principles that I look at in doing that is it a good investment in the community? And is it going to get us something that we wouldn't get otherwise? So take, for example, a project in Campus Town or in downtown that comes and asks for tax abatement. You can get one project if they don't get tax abatement. You can get bells and whistles that add to things in the community that if we are able to give tax abatement on, then that's helpful. Now, one of the things to remember about tax abatement is only abatement on the incremental increase in value of the property. So the base value of the property that was there stays taxable. The abatement is only on the additional taxation or the additional assessed value that's created on that. So it's really not giving up taxes as much as it's deferring taxes for the future. So that's part of that balancing act when we talk about these different projects that we're looking at funding. Now, TIF is a different thing. And actually, TIF kind of scares me sometimes. And there are places where it makes sense because TIF allows us as a city to be able to basically withhold all of the taxes on a project for all of the different entities in the community. So that withholds taxes, at least on a temporary basis, until the money's paid back for what we borrowed for, but it takes it from the schools, it takes it from the county, it takes it from DMAC, it takes it from the hospitals. And so that one to me has a higher bar than abatement. So it's just, those are the two things that I think about, or several of the things that I think about as we get projects brought to us.
Okay, Bronwyn?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what's been said before, I think, by Rachel and Chris, and that's just that it's got to go above and beyond. So we don't want to incentivize a business to come to town that's identical to an existing business that's here, say, and give them a tax abatement, because then, really, then they're getting a benefit that the original player didn't get, and that's inequitable. So I think when we look at projects and decide whether or not to give them tax incentives or tax abatement, looking at, yes, what the additional benefit that they're going to bring is, and that might be compromised. There might be compromises on their part about adding extra amenities, city amenities, maybe some park land designated, or, you name it. But there's got to be an additional public benefit, in my mind, to want to extend tax incentives.
Tim?
Chris really answered this question amazingly well. I would just add to this, perhaps as an example of this, the Kingland project in Campustown is an example where they recognized they had the opportunity to build this building on the outskirts of town far cheaper than to build it where they did. And so we had to make a decision to balance providing some level of incentive for what we could gain in exchange. And what we gain in exchange is having a marvelous employer right across the street from campus. So many students work at Kingland. It's an important part of their education. It's a job for them, and they go right across the street. That was a benefit for the community, we believed. But when we talk about this, and John, I love the question, it's socializing costs, right? So we're going to spread that incentive out over the entire community. And so we have to make sure that the balance of it works out for the entire community, not just for the developer. So that's my contribution on that one. Thank you.
Okay. Joe?
Yeah. So I think that, a lot of the answers have been pretty thorough. I think that when we look at what Bronwyn said, I think that she's absolutely right, that we don't want to give a tax increment finance or an abatement to a business that's going to bring jobs and pay wages that are similar to businesses that already exist. We don't need to necessarily incentivize that. We're not necessarily hurting for jobs available to us. We have the lowest unemployment rate in the country. Equally, I think that as you look at residential developments or mixed use developments that have commercial on the first floor and residential above, we have to make sure that we're recognizing the impact that has on our housing availability. So if we're going to provide an abatement or a tax incentive or a TIF, we need to recognize that it is that low income housing and that affordable housing we should be looking at building. So we need to make sure that that housing they're constructing is actually geared at answering a problem in our community. When it comes to commercial space, I think that, I kind of addressed it in regards to making sure we're not bringing the same kind of business to our community. But I think that we definitely need to, like Tim talked about, recognize opportunities where we can geographically locate a business closer to our centers so that it's more accessible, so there's less, carbon footprint resulting from that because there's less commute. So I think that in regards to that, I think those are kind of my perspectives on it. Thank you.
Okay. All right, we're going to transition now into our closing. I certainly want to thank the audience for their fine questions and thank the candidates for your answers. We're going to now allow each candidate 2 minutes to either respond more to a question or to further enhance some of your earlier answers. And we will begin with Chris.
Sure. So I did have a list of things that I thought might come up, and some of those things didn't. So this is a little bit random, but it's just a number of things I think to highlight that have happened over the last 6 years. I think Tim brought up the fact maybe that there were 10,000 additional jobs that have been created in Ames, but there have been, in Story County, in the past 6 years, there have been 6,900 jobs created in the Ames metropolitan statistical area. And between 2000 and 2010, we had 0 in the private sector. Every job that was created in that decade was in the public sector. So it's important for us to continue to diversify our economy through support of the industrial park, through the research park, and through strategic incentives and luring companies to Ames that want to locate here. So there's one. We also really haven't talked a whole lot about the asset process. Many of you probably know what it is. We're very committed to that, and we're very lucky to have the asset process. We spend more per capita and probably in absolute dollars than almost every other city, if not every other city in the state of Iowa, through that funding mechanism. And so that's what funds our human services. It's a great tool that we have, and being able to grow sales tax in our community is important because that funds our human services. The other thing that has come up peripherally is the complete streets policy, but in the past 4 years, we've seen a significant increase in multimodal transportation projects and the funding that's associated with that. And I don't know, this is 2-year-old data, but 2 years ago, we spent more in absolute dollars than the city of Des Moines did on multimodal projects. So we're committed to that, and it's important to the city and to council. So I guess in closing, I'd like to say that there's a 6-year track record of making good decisions for doing things in the community and moving things forward. I think that I'm probably the best person to represent Ames, with the depth in Ward 4 and with the depth and breadth of experience, knowledge, and capabilities and skills that I bring to the table. So thank you again.
Bronwyn?
Well, in my last 4 years on council, I've really enjoyed my time. I've learned a lot. People ask me how I like it, and I say I like it, and they look at me funny. It's like, no, I do. It's fascinating stuff. I like learning about all these municipal issues, and I like making decisions, and I hope that they're the best decisions for Ames. I feel like we are on the right track, though. When I ran, I said that I wanted to make Ames a cool, progressive city. I think we were already that, but we are even more so today, I would say, and I think we're headed in the right direction. So working on more of that is what I look forward to. Things I'm most proud of that we've accomplished would be more funding towards multimodal infrastructure, as Chris mentioned, the Complete Streets Plan, getting the community solar project off the ground, just to name a few. But again, looking forward to working a lot more on climate issues, and then all the other things too that keep Ames running smoothly and add to our quality of life here. So thank you very much again for coming tonight and listening to us talk for 2 hours.
Tim?
Has it been 2 hours?
That was quick.
Amazing. So thank you to the league for putting this on tonight. I think things are going really well in Ames. I hope you feel that way. I'm very bullish on this community. I believe our better days are ahead. It's a very exciting time to be in Ames. But yet there are a couple things that we didn't touch on tonight that I want to just briefly mention. First of all, the issue of race. We have a problem with this in this community. Too many of our students of color at Iowa State do not graduate. We need to understand why. We have a bit of a revolving door when it comes to faculty and staff at Iowa State. There was of people of color. There was a recent climate study done at Iowa State, and many faculty and staff of color do not feel that Ames is a welcoming place. I want to understand why that is, and I want to try to make Ames a better place for that. And another topic that is very important to me is the subject of volunteerism. I hope everyone in this room has a place where they connect in this community and say, this is a way you give back. But do you realize that through YSS, through the mentoring program, right now we have a waiting list of children who need a mentor, but there's no mentor for them. I want to live in a community where there's a waiting list of adults who are so bummed that they can't find someone to mentor. That's the kind of community I want to live in. But that means all of us finding a place to serve and work in our community. I think it's a great place. I appreciate the questions. This was very thoughtful, and thank you for your participation.
Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, thank you. So in regards to the asset program, I think that we are really blessed to have such a fantastic way of funding nonprofit organizations in addressing some of the social needs of our community. I think that some of the steps that have been taken recently that have failed need to be raised again. We need to really build a cohesive and shared priority list with the different funders so that we can recognize when we have a shared goal and make sure that we're funding that together. The number of organizations asking for asset funding has risen rather drastically. Gene Cressy and I had a great conversation about that. And I think that we need to make sure that the limited funding we do have, while we do work to grow it, is applied to address the issues that our community needs addressing. So by creating that priority list, by creating that shared vision, we can make sure that that's addressed. Equally, I think the Ames 2040 plan is one of the biggest things that we need to talk about in our community. We need to recognize that we're going to make a plan for 20 years of Ames growth. We're going to make a plan that needs to address all of the things that our community needs to, all of the issues that our community is facing now and in the future. So we need to make sure that we're first taking care of our existing students, or our existing residents. We need to make sure that the neighborhoods we have in our community are getting that fresh coat of paint. We need to make sure that we're investing in the places that we may not necessarily think are profitable or financially or economically viable, because those are where people live and they deserve respect. So I think, in closing, I've experienced what it's like to live in Ames the 8 years I've lived here. I understand what it's like to have a lot of your income go to housing. I understand what it's like to struggle to make ends meet. I, have the drive and I have the motivation to make sure that you're all heard and make sure that I spend all of my time making sure that I'm researching every aspect of our community to make sure it's better. So I think that I would be a fantastic representative for the 4th Ward, and I hope you don't forget to vote on November 5th. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, candidates, for a very informative evening.
Oh, wait.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did so well up until that point. Okay, Rachel.
We're so close, everyone. One more.
I'm anxious.
So I decided to run for city council because I saw a need for someone on the council to represent the voices of students and balance that with the experience of being a lifelong Ames resident. Ames has been a great place for me to grow up and live, and it's where I want to continue to build my future. And I want that for Iowa State students as well that are looking for building their future. And I want a great Ames for everyone who lives here and a high quality of life. I truly think that City Council should represent the population of Ames. And with that mixed population, I feel that I'm the best person to represent the 4th Ward. I really hope that this discussion tonight has educated a lot of people about issues in our community. And that's kind of also why I'm running for City Council, is to bring more people into the process. One of my favorite parts has been going out into the community and hearing from them what are the things we could improve or change or do differently in Ames. And so I look forward to continuing to do that in the next few months. And I hope to earn your support on November 5th.
Thank you, Rachel. And I apologize for my fupa.
No problem.
All right. We do want to thank you, candidates, for your willingness to run and for your service to our city up to this point. As always, the League encourages everyone to vote. So remember to vote on Tuesday, November 5th. Polls will be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Please visit the Story County Auditor's website for complete information on polling locations, voter registration, absentee ballots, sample ballots, and more. We also have some materials outside the door as well as membership applications to the League of Women Voters if you're interested. This concludes the Ames City Council Candidate Forum. Again, thank you, candidates, for your commitment and for serving the citizens of Ames. And thank you to all citizens actively participating in the government process. Good night.